What we're seeing here is a mass betrayal of Israel's elite.
This kind of elite created this incredible twisted government that we see now, which is, I would say, post-democratic. I mean, we have a prime minister who have no public support.
And when you think about it, I mean, it's fairly clear that he's a sociopath. Hi, welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour. Joined this week by a very old and close colleague of mine, Amnon Lord. Amnon Lord was actually the guy who brought me into journalism way back when, 22 years ago, when I was still a graduate student at Harvard, and he got me to write my first article in Makori Shon, where he was a senior columnist at the time. And so in a way, if you like what I write, then you owe him a debt of gratitude. If you hate it, then he's to blame, of course, entirely. But before I show you Amnon, I just want to say that Amnon Lord started out as a cultural critic, as a theater critic, or a film critic, actually. Film critic. Here he is. Here's Amnon. Amnon started out his career as a film critic, and he slowly, over time, became just an avid observer of Israeli culture, Israeli society, and then strategic issues. He was a senior columnist and later editor, I think, of Makori Shon, where I started my journalistic career with him. And then he moved to Israel Hayom, where he's a senior columnist and my colleague there today, which is terrific. One of the things that I wanted to talk about with Amnon here, and I'm just going to put it on gallery view since you ruined the whole, hi Amnon, great to have you here. Here, everybody, this is Amnon. One of the things that we wanted to talk about this week when we were talking about this program is we want to talk about blood libels, because today Israel is in the middle of a new blood libel regarding the death of Shireen Abu Akleh, an Al-Jazeera journalist who was standing with terrorists as they were opening fire and shooting at Israeli forces in the city of Jenin last Wednesday morning, Tuesday night. And she was killed apparently by Palestinians, but that's no matter. And Israel is being blamed internationally by the US, by the UN, by Egypt, by the media all over the place for this horrible thing. Never mind that journalists have died by the dozens in Ukraine, or that journalists have been dying by the hundreds over the past 30 years of terror war. But Israel now, this is the crime of the century, and Israel, of course, committed it. So Amnon, I wanted to start our discussion today with another blood libel that both of us know and that you did a lot of work on 20 years ago or 22 years ago, which was the blood libel of Muhammad Al-Dura.
Actually, it was 20 years ago.
It was in 2000, wasn't it?
2002.
2000.
But no,
it was in 2000. It was in October of 2000.
The event of the Al-Dura shooting was on on September 30th, 2000.
Right.
And this was actually the trigger, the fuel for the second intifada. But let me just set the record straight. I didn't start as a film critic. I did many years, I did legwork as a reporter, as a writer for Hadashot newspaper. I actually wrote the first major article from Gaza right at the beginning of the first intifada, just to give you an idea how many years I'm in the business, because this was in December 1987. It's right. A bit shaky to mention this year, right? We're now at 2022. I did a lot of legwork, a lot of reporting from the ground, from the area, from not just in the territories, but in Israel itself, in culture. And eventually I started to write about film.
So here's the thing. It's wonderful that I finally am having you on my program so that I can learn things that I should have known, but I never actually did know about a man that I've been close friends with for 22 years. So glad to have you on the program so that I could learn
It's
this
a
about
reunion.
you.
It's a
Right?
reunion.
Yeah.
And we can.
So
So,
the thing
okay.
with Mohammed Al-Dura, let's talk about it for a second. Should I just stage it just so that people remember if they forgot, or learn about it if they never heard of it? Or would you like to do that?
Let's say the second Intifada started on September 28, 2000 in Rosh Hashanah, but it didn't do the trick. They needed something, a real trigger for mass riots, for violence, and this was the Al-Dura case. There was a crossfire between IDF soldiers and Palestinian police or soldiers in Tzomet Netzarim Junction in Gaza. It was inside the Gaza Strip. And there was a father and son. The child was Muhammad Al-Dura. And there was a television photographer, Abu Rahma, who photographed the entire scene for quite few minutes. He was zooming on the father and son who took shelter, supposedly, near the wall of the Palestinian compound or something like this. And he captured how the child was hit. And then the French network broadcast the picture.
France 2. It was France 2.
And I called it a blood libel, but Richard Landes actually gave it the distribution or the name of the first blood libel of the 21st century. So he also, Professor Landes also invented the idea or coined the expression of Paliwood. Do you remember this word?
Yeah, Paliwood is the Palestinian
Palestinians and
propaganda.
Hollywood.
Yeah, it's a Palestinian propaganda operation.
How they staged various scenes on the ground in front of the IDF and got what they wanted on camera.
So let me just say, so just to sum up, what happened with Mohammed Al-Dura is that the 20 minutes of footage that Abu Rahma took never showed what it was claimed that it was showing. I mean, and what was released to the world was a very small outtake of, I think it was 20 minutes of film that he took just of this father and son before anything had even happened. And he saw the stage direction that the Palestinians were being told where to stand and what to do.
I don't. The thing is that when this was investigated, eventually the most responsible result or definition was that the IDF didn't shoot the bullets. We don't know who shot it. I don't want to commit myself to say that the Palestinians intentionally shot the child because they wanted the picture, but at least it can be said quite confidently that Israel or the IDF soldiers didn't shoot the bullets, and definitely they wouldn't do anything like this on purpose. The interesting thing is that in Israel, in the Israeli government, there is now a minister, Nachman Shai, right? Nachman Shai did a research. The research for his doctorate, for his PhD, was the Al-Dura case. And he knows all those details. And yet, after the death of the journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, he said that Israel doesn't have a good record in telling the truth.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves because we want to talk about blood libels as blood libels and what they do and what their purpose is. And then we want to move on.
The purpose is to create a wave of hatred and prepare public opinion against Israel to prepare the public opinion in the States, in Europe, to the idea that Israel should be wiped out of the map, should be destroyed. But
No,
the power of this, of this kind of episode is because of the, I want to mention the name of a colleague, a friend, Nidra Poller. She called it lethal narratives. You know, narrativim katlanim, lethal narrative. There was a narrative that was produced for a long time before Al-Dura was killed, that the Israeli soldiers have a sport to kill Palestinian children. And now we have a child in front of the camera being killed. It's not clear if he was really killed in that episode. And so the picture fit into the old narrative. And of course, Israel is killing children, fits into the old canard, the old blood libel, the historical blood libel that the Jews kill children. They kill goyim, children.
Non-Jewish children to eat
Christian children. And so, here
let me just say a couple of things. One is that the footage that was taken was not what everybody saw. What Abu Akleh did was when he sent it to France 2, he may have actually sent them the whole thing. I can't remember anymore. But what was shown to the world was a very short outtake of what he had filmed that day. And, definitely. And what France 2 did, this is the French government television station, they allowed everybody to use their footage. And so it wasn't just one state television.
They didn't give them their footage, they gave it already edited. The main thing to remember is that the television correspondent, Charles Anderlan, who is actually an Israeli citizen, was not in the area, okay? Because everybody thinks that a true journalist stood there and saw the scene. He did not. He got the footage, the raw footage from Abu Akleh, who actually testified that he didn't know who shot the bullets. Abu Akleh himself.
But it's important that this footage, this highly edited footage, was then disseminated for free by
of course, everybody, all the international networks, all the news outlets.
So that it was a concerted
including
decision.
Israel.
It was a concerted decision by France to disseminate edited video footage that seemed to indicate that Israeli soldiers had killed a child. And then this footage was used at violent anti-Israel demonstrations in Paris, in London, all over the world.
It ignited the entire Muslim communities in France, Germany, Britain, and especially in the Islamic world. This image became iconic.
Exactly. And you had pictures of Mohammed Al-Dura and his father hiding behind a barrel, ostensibly cringing from IDF fire all over. And one of the most notable places that it was used was in the execution video, the beheading video of Daniel Pearl, the Wall Street Journal reporter who was killed by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks in Pakistan in January 2002. So this was used as justification for the execution of Daniel Pearl.
Okay, so it shows you that those horrible events fit into the old patterns. And I think we should take a step back and speak about how anti-Semitism was ignited or reignited in the last 150 or 120 years ago. Because although the Palestinians actually traffic in Jewish hatred, they wouldn't get very far. Let me just mention, when we talk about blood libels or conspiracy theories or stuff like this, today, 15th May 2022, this is the day of the Nakba, right?
Mhm.
It's important. Well, why is it being mentioned or being, or why the Palestinians use it all the time?
Wait.
No.
Nakba Day. May 15th is May 15th, 1948 is the day on the Gregorian calendar, not the Jewish calendar,
okay, sure.
that Israel was established. So the Arabs
Israel was established on the 14th. The Arab armies invaded
on
Israel
the 15th.
On the 15th, but for the Palestinians, it's Nakba Day.
Nakba means the day of the destruction, right? Of the cataclysm of the great, and this is like their.
We can assume, we can be pretty sure that in many campuses in the great democracy of the United States, they mention this day also. Why? This is a complete lopsided vision of the events of 1948. But when you created this Nakbaism, the Nakba Day, it's a bit like a blood libel. You invaded Israel, you wanted to eliminate and to annihilate the entire Jewish community in the land of Israel in Palestine. You failed. This was the epilogue of the Shoah, right? It was only 3 years after the Shoah. The Arabs wanted to write the last chapter of the Holocaust, to annihilate the last Jewish community they can lay their hands on, and they failed. Israel survived. We lost something between 6,000 to 7,000 Israelis, and some 600,000 Arabs fled the country. And when we say fled the country, some of them just walked about 10 miles, 20 miles away and settled here in Palestine, not abroad. So this is like a big lie. And I want, when we talk about blood libels, I think that we should mention two very important books on the subject. One of them is a classic. It's called Warrant for Genocide by Norman Cohen. It was actually published in 1967. The other
I'm looking for my. I'm going to put you on speaker view because I'm going to just look for my my copy so I can show everybody.
The other one is the lie that wouldn't die by the ex-judge Hadassah Ben-Ito. Hadassah Ben-Ito is no longer with us. She passed away. And I think that Norman Cohen also passed away a long time ago. Judge Hadassah Ben-Ito actually wrote huge research about the protocols of the elders of Zion. And this is really the
main... let me just show you. This is Norman Cohen's book, and you're talking about the protocols. So what he does is, it's called Warrant for Genocide: The Myth of the Jewish World Conspiracy and the Protocols of the Elder of Zion. It came out, I think, in 1968. And what he shows in this book, and it's very important, is that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a forgery that was written by the Tsarist secret police, that claims that there's a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world, run by a council called the Elders of Zion. It was used as a justification for the Holocaust and almost every other mass murder of Jews that followed.
It created the culture
of genocide. Of annihilationist anti-Semitism.
Of a culture of conspiracies, of Jewish conspiracies, that the Jews are planning to take over the world, that the Jews control the media, and so on and so forth. And they created a very powerful, and this was not long ago. I mean, Hitler was inspired by it. Hitler and the head of the Nazis, Henry Ford in the United States.
He serialized it, actually. Henry Ford serialized the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in his in his newspaper, and he also published it in English. So
even the Times of London published parts of it as a great revelation, but they retracted the publication because they understood that anyway, it was very popular in the States, in England, in Germany. It started in Russia. In Russia, there was a party at the beginning of the 20th century, the Black Century. And the Black Century was actually a preview for the Nazi Party. This is Norman Cohen saying, not I. And they even thought in terms of annihilating the entire Jewish population. So you have something like this, very powerful. And when you want to go ahead, even John Mearsheimer, who is now the star of analysis of the war in Ukraine, he said that Israel or the Jewish lobby pushed the United States to the war in Iraq in 2003 and Afghanistan. And in some ways, the idea of the Jewish lobby in the United States, which is shared by the Israeli left, and it's like an axiom in the American left, the Jewish lobby. The Jewish lobby is some kind of a scarecrow or something. It's a concept which is based on those tropes of the Jewish conspiracy, and which is all based on the protocols of the elders of Zion.
But to go back for a second to what we're seeing here with the Palestinians and theirs and their use of blood libels, I was on a television program yesterday here in Israel, and I was explaining that basically the PLO is a walking, talking blood libel. That the blood libel is used. The purpose of the blood libel is to demonize and delegitimize and prepare hearts and mind for the mass murder of Jews. And the PLO does both. That their political warfare, its goal is to dehumanize Jews, to delegitimize the existence of the Jewish collective of Israel, because the blood libel is never against, Shylock. It's never against one Jew. It's against the Jewish collective. And it's a means not to find somebody who's guilty of committing a specific crime, but to criminalize the people, the Jews, through conspiracy theories and through false allegations.
Yes.
And it's not something that you can prove or disprove, because its purpose it's not to find one person guilty of one crime. It's to criminalize the people, and it's to prepare.
But
again,
it's based on some single act in which the entire Jewish population is collectively guilty.
Right.
Guilty.
So the IDF kills babies, like Nidra Polar said. And that's the narrative that's been put out for decades by the Palestinian. It's never been true, but it doesn't matter. And then when Muhammad Al-Dura died, apparently on September 30th, 2000, at Netzarim Junction in Gaza, he was used as a means to then demonize, but it's not just demonize and dehumanize Israelis, it's to prepare the groundwork, as you said, in the West and of course throughout the Arab world, for the mass murder of Jews. And that is what followed in the Palestinian terror war that began in late September, early October of 2000. So it's both.
Yeah,
that's the PLO.
It's
that's
always something
in the world.
Like one journalist, it's a tragedy, is being killed. We don't know who had done it. I talked with a friend that you know probably his name, Pinchas. Shall we mention him? Pinchas Inbari is the most veteran reporter on Palestinian issues in Israel, maybe in the world. I mean, he follows the things since the mid-1960s. I asked him if he remember any journalists being killed in the territories in the last 40 years, because I couldn't remember anyone. He said, no, you're right. I don't remember any incident in which a journalist was killed. So the IDF, in a way, comes clean. It comes with, okay, it's possible that the journalist will be killed when you have a battle between the IDF and the terrorists, but she was killed, and immediately she's supposed to be in the category of Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. This is like the American consciousness is being conditioned by such an event which has no connection. So you see the ambassador in the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, Jen Psaki, the president, they all express horror that she was killed, and they, of course, condemn it. As soon as you hear that the killing is condemned, most people, they can't condemn Israel directly, but they condemn the killing. The automatic reaction is Israel did it, Israel is to blame.
Well, especially when you have Democratic lawmakers, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who are coming right out and saying Israel kills everybody, Israel's evil, Israel killed this person just like they kill everybody. And you have the whole BDS chorus claiming that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians. And you go on Al-Jazeera, you go on the BBC, you go on any of these.
And definitely it's more important than the people who were killed in north of New York, right, in the supermarket, or all the people, and
all the Jews who were killed. I mean, it's also yes. Why, all of the
20
Jews
Israelis were killed in the last couple of months, and Jews were killed in the last couple of years in America. It doesn't count.
Yeah.
One journalist from Al-Jazeera,
which is a jihadist network,
jihad. From Princehood, from Qatar, who is supporting terrorism, immediately she gets sainthood,
Well, it's like Rachel Corrie, what was she called? Saint Pancake, who got herself.
Let's not, she got killed by,
she got killed by a D9 while she was interfering with IDF. No, but the thing is that Rachel Corrie was killed while interfering with IDF counterterror operations in Gaza.
Let's leave it.
This is important. I know you. Let me just explain. It's important because then the Royal Covent Garden put on a play called Who Killed Rachel Corrie, which was an extension of this blood libel. So that it doesn't matter what the context in which the IDF bulldozer operator was operating in. It doesn't matter what he was trying to achieve. It doesn't matter what kind of terror onslaught Israel was suffering from that area of Gaza specifically, which required the IDF to operate there. It doesn't matter that Rachel Corrie was a dyed-in-the-wool Jew hater who had joined a Palestinian terrorist cause for Israel's annihilation, and was using her position as a Western citizen, I think she's American, from Washington State, to interfere with IDF counterterror operations. None of that matters, because she was killed after putting herself into a position where it was likely that she would be killed. She was then upheld as a martyr that was killed by the evil Jews, and that story, that completely distorted rendition of reality of what happened, was then used to perpetuate and to expand and amplify the blood libel of Israel being a malign actor, the collective Jews being a malignancy in the world that deserves to be annihilated. And so again, this is very important. This is the heart of what's happening today. And then we see that the Biden administration, as you said, and of course all the other usual suspects, have latched on to the story of the Al Jazeera journalist in order to condemn Israel, in order to embrace the concept of Israeli malignancy. And that's what we're facing today.
I think the main strategic goals of how to use these tragic events is, First of all, it's a very convenient timing. They have triggered a great reaction in the West Bank, in the Palestinian population for the Nakba Day. They want action in the Nakba Day, and this is a great trigger for it. The other one is what I called moral counteroffensive, which means when the IDF or when Israeli forces are being successful in fighting terrorism in the bases of the terrorists, in Jenin, in Nablus, in wherever, at a certain point, we will see an event like this in order to stop all military action. Now the IDF and Israel in general is sitting back and trying to think what next should be done. And we're being very careful. We don't know even why. Maybe the forces, when Noam Raz, who got killed in action a couple of days ago, maybe they were too careful, too cautious in their action, and this was the cause for its death. We don't know, but definitely this kind of killing of Shireen Abu Akleh it inhibits the military action.
It's interesting that you mentioned Noam Raz, who actually is being buried on Mount Herzl at the military cemetery as we're recording this show. Noam Raz was a member of the police counterterror. It's a unit, the Yamam. It's one of the most elite counterterror units in the world, and he's 48 years old. This is for professionals. This isn't just soldiers who get out when they're 21, 22 years old. This is for people who do it every day as a career. And what I found alarming about the operation that they did in Jenin, it was this. So Shireen Abu Akleh is killed on Wednesday morning, and rather than recognize what we're walking into, that this is a blood libel, that they're going to use her death to try to criminalize Israel, the foreign minister Yair Lapid legitimizes the blood libelers, the slanderers, by saying that he wants to have a joint investigation of her death with the Palestinian Authority, which is a primary organ that's disseminating this libel against IDF forces. So there's absolutely no way that they were going to say yes. And there's absolutely no reason for us to grant them this kind of legitimacy while they're engaging in a new blood libel against us, and they're organizing it. And then we found out on Friday afternoon that the purpose of the Jenin operation was to capture the Palestinian terrorists, one of the terrorists that was shooting at IDF forces when she was killed, because the IDF suspects that he's the one who shot her. And I was thinking about it this morning, about how absurd this operation is, because they were able to capture this man alive, fine, but Noam Raz was killed trying to capture him, not fine. And what do we expect to happen if this guy acknowledges that he killed Shireen Abu Akleh while he's under Israeli custody in the midst of a blood libel, when they're dehumanizing the IDF? The IDF is being condemned by the White House for no reason. Who's going to believe him? And it's just going to be so that the problem is that every time that you grant even a smidgen of legitimacy to the slanderers and to the libel itself, by engaging in an attempt to deny it here in this case, all you do is get deeper and deeper into the muck, because yes, the purpose of it is not to allow Israel to exculpate its alleged guilt. It's not to prove that it's innocent. Nothing that Israel does is going to make any difference. And simply by catering to this kind of thing, we get sucked in deeper and deeper. That's my contention.
I'd like to mention two other historical events from Jenin, and maybe one of them the method should be copied. The first one is the Battle of Jenin in April 2002. Mm-hmm. Saib Arikat, the great diplomat who's being admired by all the Palestinian lovers, he led a campaign immediately at the end of or during the battle, that the IDF is doing or perpetrating a massacre, about 500 being killed. It turned out that there were 51 terrorists that got killed in the battle, and more than 20 Israeli soldiers. It's not
23.
such a. It was a very fierce battle that lasted a few days. I don't remember exactly. I think the IDF or whoever investigated it could be also that there was some international.
The UN investigated and they came up with these numbers, but a year
No,
later.
I'm not. Okay, so this maybe it should be done in this way as long as Israel has representatives who can invest or question all the people involved with the journalists, including the producer, her family members, and other elements in the area, because the facts are important and should be recorded. Of course, the whole thing with the Jenin battle is that the propaganda thing never died. Remember, the lie who would not die. This is the name of the book by Hadassah Ben Ito. Muhammad Bakri, the great actor, he directed the documentary which perpetuate the myth of, or the blood libel of the Jenin massacre.
And we have to remember, what was the imagery that Saeb Erekat and Terry Larson from the UN and others, Kofi Annan at the time, the Secretary General of the UN, were using? They were comparing it to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. They were calling Israel, the Nazis, the Palestinian terrorists in Jenin that had trapped almost every home in the area of the battle. They were referring to them as
the thing that we had at that time in 2002. We had unconventional weapon in the international community, and this is Shimon Peres, was the foreign minister. Really, in that kind of historical moments, Peres was very useful. He was he contributed to lowering the flames and eventually to setting the record straight. Even Haaretz, Iton Haaretz at that time, Amira Haas, she herself, she writes always against Israel. She went to Jenin right after the battle, and she came with those, with the data that we were talking about, that there was no massacre, that there were like 50-something terrorists killed, and that there were all those Israelis soldiers who got killed. But remember that the battle was waged without any artillery support and without any aerial support, because the IDF or the Deputy Chief of Staff, Ya'alon, didn't want to risk any collateral damage. I don't know if
our soldiers were collateral damage for our fear of CNN.
Of course. The other event in Jenin, which I'd like to mention because it's in a way similar, not a journalist, but the film star, Giuliano Mer. Let's remember the name. Giuliano Mer was one of the greatest Israeli film stars of all time. He was a theater actor and a film actor, and he was also identified partly as a Palestinian because he was the son of a mixed couple. Arab father, Jewish mother, and he wanted to produce a small theater in Jenin. He was murdered 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, maybe around 2010, he was murdered. Immediately the left and the entire pro-Palestinian bodies in the world, they didn't mention it. It was something that nobody has to, it shouldn't be talked about. It's amazing how they crushed, how they put a wet blanket on this event. What's the difference between a film star and a journalist?
Well, apparently his politics weren't the right politics.
His murder didn't fit any narrative.
Right.
It didn't fit the blood libel against the Jews. So the story and the name Julian Omer should be buried with his body. It's
I think that it's important when you say, look, we were able to prove and people showed that only 51 terrorists were killed versus the 500 innocent
51,
women and children who 51 were killed. And the claims against Israel that continue to this day were that over 500 were killed and they were mainly women and children. There's absolutely no connection between the allegation and the reality.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But here's my essential point in terms of participating in investigations and all of the rest of it. There are two problems with this. One is I woke up this morning and I'm listening to the radio and they're interviewing on the radio the Minister of Culture, Glick, about whether or not Israel should be funding this Akko Theater Festival, which is traditionally very far left theater festival, very post-Zionist, that's produced in the mixed Jewish Arab city of Akko, which was also the scene of lynch mobs last year, and also last week there was an attempted lynch of two brothers who were fishing in the harbor in Akko, two Jewish boys or young men by a mob of Arabs, and they luckily were only moderately injured. But the discussion that they had on the radio with Glick was whether or not the state should fund the production of Jenin as a play in the Akko Festival, so that 20 years later, after it's already been proven, the blood libel continues on. And not only that, Israel, just as there was a huge fight over whether the Cinematheque in Tel Aviv would show Jenin. So here too, now they're turning it into a play. And the question is whether the government should underwrite this production, which of course the answer is no, but we're at this point. And the other point that I wanted to make about the allegation about Jenin, and now from 20 years ago, and now the allegation about Jenin from last week, is that, again, if you accept as legitimate the people who are slandering Israel and propagating these blood libels, and the main propagator of all of this is the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, even more than Hamas, then you are giving credence to what they're doing. And that's the problem, is that the Israeli left, including Shimon Peres and obviously Amira Haas and all of these other people that you mentioned, they're also responsible, in my opinion, for the preponderance of these blood libels, because they continue to legitimize the PLO. They continue to see them as a legitimate actor, when this is an actor that was established and continues to function 55 years later as a walking, talking blood libel machine, both in terms of the dehumanization of Jews and the mass murder of Jews.
First of all, I'm all for the staging of the Akko Theater Festival again. It will be in Sukkot, right? This is generally.
I don't know. I believe it or not, I never go. I mean, I'm sure you'll be shocked to discuss.
I remember a couple of times that I went to this theater festival in Akko many years ago. I think it would be good to reignite it, no matter what, even if there are leftists or, we live in a democracy that allows anti-democracy and anti-Jewish propaganda to live within the democracy. Tough luck, this is democracy. I don't know if we can, we should aim at not financing anti-Israeli films, but I don't know about it. I'm not sure that we should get into it. We should understand. But you mentioned Haaretz, Amira Haas, and all those. Imagine that a few days ago, and actually on the issue of Independence Day, there was an article by another star who was actually, I'm quite friendly with him, but it's ridiculous. Gideon Levy, okay? Gideon Levy. What did he write? He gave legitimacy to the UN resolution from 1975 that equates Zionism with racism. He said, wow, they knew something that we didn't know. So he legitimizes the Soviet communist libel, which everybody denied, especially the UN ambassador, the US ambassador to the UN at that time, Moynihan, who actually declared that the US will not abide by this resolution. And, later on, the father of the current president of Israel tore this resolution. I suggest to Gideon Levy to go back to 1952 and check the protocols of the show trials in Prague. Maybe he could, maybe he will find that the Jews who were hanged there were actually Zionist imperialist agents. Maybe the doctors in Moscow were guilty. Maybe the pogroms were right. It's such a stupidity. I don't have.
Except I don't know that. I mean, I agree with you. Saying that that the UN was prescient and saying that Zionism is racism.
No. I'm saying about Gideon Levy.
No, but that's where I want to go. Is that I agree with you, but I'm saying that what Gideon Levy is saying. First of all, there have always been Jews who are willing to legitimize anti-Semitism, because they are anti-Semites, because they do think that there's something fundamentally wrong with Jewish peoplehood and various other things, whether it's, over time, depending on whatever aspect of Judaism is coming under attack. If it's religion, then you have the Jews who converted to Catholicism in Spain, who were used as the main inquisitors against the Jews in these show trials against Judaism and the Jewish religion. So whatever the Jewish collective is demonized for, you'll always find Jews who will join the demonizers. And Gideon Levy is no different, and many of these far leftists are no different from the Ricardo Cristianos of yesteryear in terms of their demonization of their fellow Jews and their enthusiastic embrace of that cause. But all I'm saying is, let me just go from there, is that what we're seeing here with Gideon Levy and in a larger way with his current government that's empowering the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood Party, RAM, in the coalition and agreeing to have the Joint Arab List, which supports Assad and Hezbollah, among many other things, and none of them recognize Israel's right to exist.
They definitely support Putin in his attack on Ukraine.
Right. They support basically all the enemies of the good in the world, including the Jewish state, first and foremost. What we're seeing here is a mass betrayal of Israel's elite. In so many, you had pro-Nakba demonstrations calling for the annihilation of Israel at Hebrew University campus, the Tel Aviv University campus last week, where you had radical Jewish students joining with Arab students calling for Israel's annihilation. So, we're having this weird thing going on among our elites. And I think that this might be a good time to pivot to that, because I think you wrote about it over Shabbat, and I think I also spoke about it on the news and wrote about it. I think everybody's really thinking about it. Are we going to be able to survive this crisis that we're in, where the elites seem to have lost interest in this country?
Yes, the main problem is when you have a threat of annihilation, you first have to prepare public opinion in the world for the idea, to disseminate the idea of a world without the Jewish state. The way it was propagated, that we have to get used to the idea of the world without Jews. Eventually, when this will penetrate enough people in the world, someone will try to annihilate Israel. Israel is always on the edge. It's quite a sad thing to watch, that there is a small minority, but very influential among the elites in Israel, who it's almost a critical mess in this elite, that actually identified with the Palestinian struggle and lost any identity with Israel. They don't, maybe they don't want to annihilate it per se, but they don't want it as a Jewish state. And I say that in a way, well, this is the main problem. This kind of elite created this incredible twisted government that we see now, which is, I would say, post-democratic. I mean, we have a prime minister who have no public support, who have hardly any Knesset member. There are supposedly 5 Knesset members who are in the party of Naftali Bennett. One of them had to resign because they didn't trust him. I mean, the entire group that Bennett controls in the Knesset is not really supportive of him. And this is only because the elites in Israel is strong enough to manipulate the establishment. This is the only reason why he's still a prime minister. I would expect him to understand personally that he cannot, Israel in this condition, in this situation, cannot afford to have this kind of prime minister who has no leadership, who has no public support. He should resign and afford the possibility or the opportunity to create a national government headed by the Likud, by Benjamin Netanyahu. This is the only answer to the crisis that Israel is being put in right now.
You're right, but I mean, when you think about it, I mean, it's fairly clear that he's a sociopath. I mean, it's actually.
I don't want to call him names. I mean,
I'm not. It's not a name. I think it's a description because what we're I mean, look what we're looking at here. Yom Tov Kalfon, who is a member of Knesset from Yamina, who was brought in.
But let's not.
No. This is important. No. The reason why I'm saying it is not to digress, is that he didn't resign. He was forced out.
He was forced out, yeah.
Because
they didn't trust him. They thought that maybe.
Well, that may be one of the reasons. Another one of the reasons that's being raised now is that from sources inside of Yamina itself is that he was fired at the insistence of the Muslim Brotherhood Party, Ram, that Mansour Abbas demanded that he be fired.
Nobody can fire a Chaver Knesset. You can fire a minister.
You can fire him because he was fired. I mean, they said
Matan
Kahana is coming back.
They pressured him to leave, but a Knesset member cannot be fired. It's.
Well, he was what's called a Norwegian member of Knesset. He was brought in, and the law actually allows them to be fired because then the person whose place they're taking comes back to the Knesset.
I don't know about it.
But the point here is that what we're seeing is something that I don't know that. I mean, maybe Ariel Sharon acted. Well, maybe Ariel Sharon acted like this, but Ariel Sharon had something that as much as I despised him at this point in his career when he was undertaking the withdrawal from Gaza and the mass expulsion of all the Jews from Gaza and northern Samaria, is that he had public support for what he was doing. And I could say that it was wrong from a democratic perspective because he was implementing the agenda that he had campaigned against and that he had won the elections in a landslide on the basis of his campaign against unilateral surrenders to the Palestinians. But still, there were a lot of people in Israel who supported him a lot. And Naftali has zero support publicly.
Sure.
His party has fallen apart. He doesn't control anybody at all, except Matan Kahana. He has one other person with him in the Knesset, one. Out of 120, there are 2. His 5-seat faction, there's really 2 factions with him controlling only 2 members, himself and Matan Kahana. And he has no party. After the way that he's treated everybody who is in the Knesset with him, he's never going to be able to form another party. Nobody will ever run with him for Knesset again. And yet here he is, presuming to be the prime minister. And that's why I don't think that calling him a sociopath is calling him a name. I think it's an accurate descriptor. And the problem here is that, we have a government that from day to day becomes more and more dependent for its very survival on the two Arab factions, one that's officially a member of the Knesset, which is the Muslim Brotherhood Party, RAM, and the other one is a Joint Arab List, which is an openly anti-Semitic party that supports every terrorist organization and Vladimir Putin on the face of the planet. And it's they who decide whether Naftali, who's behaving, at least in a sociopathological way, remains prime minister or not.
Yes, it's a very sad situation. At least we can, what we can see here is the connection, that there is a vital connection between democracy, true democracy, and national security. When democracy is deteriorating or disintegrating the way it is now, because we have a prime minister who is maybe legally PM, but it's not a democratic situation. We see that also the national security is deteriorating. Everybody understands that the Israeli security policy, the military counterterrorism strategy is not really what the IDF should have done, but it's being dictated by the red lines of the Muslim party, which is part of this lopsided coalition.
You know, and the thing, you're absolutely right. I think that there is a very close relationship between national security and democracy. And I think that this goes to the question that I was raising before, which was about where our elites stand, because democracy, of course, and democracy is linked to national security, because if you want to be able to protect your country, its defense, its national interests, then you're going to have, in an operating democracy, a majority of the country wants that to happen. Obviously, most people want their nations to survive, otherwise they would emigrate, I would assume. So if you have a majority government, you're also going to have a government that's committed to national security. If you have a government that isn't representative of the majority of the people in the country, then you're not going to have national security, because you're not going to have representatives who are committed to the
interest of the population. But let us, Caroline, let us go back to two other historical events which are important in perpetuating the blood libel.
All right.
One of them is a very important book that came out by a Russian propagandist by the name of Yuri Ivanov in 1970. It's called Caution Zionism, or maybe Beware, Zionism. Ivanov actually, I would say, he rejuvenated or recreated the protocols in the language of the post 6 Days War, that Israel is racist, that Israel exploits its population, that Israel is so and so. I think in that book, he also mentioned that Israel is an apartheid state, although the first one who blamed Israel for being an apartheid state, you wouldn't believe it. It's the predecessor of Yasser Arafat, Shukeri in 1961 or 1962, in a speech to the UN.
But don't forget that our friend Joel Fishman uncovered documents that showed that the first time that Israel was accused of being an apartheid state was in 1965, I think. Before
in 1962, Shukeri.
No, not Shukeri. I'm not talking about what Shukeri said. I'm saying that a UN resolution was passed that referred to Israel as an apartheid state. Was, I think, in 1965. It was like the UN cultural. It wasn't UNESCO. It was some esoteric UN committee. It was a Soviet resolution Joel Fishman wrote about it about 15 years ago, and the Israeli delegation at the UN was caught completely off guard, was totally flabbergasted by this
Interesting.
event.
For me, it's new, but in that context, I would like to mention there was an interview a week ago, maybe, or 2 weeks ago, in the New Yorker magazine with the Ukraine ambassador to the UN, and he thought it's important to remember that part of the UN DNA is not only the two fathers, Roosevelt and Churchill, it's also the third father of the UN, which is Stalin. He said part of the DNA of the UN is Stalinist, and we experienced it. There was no other state that experienced the UN with its Stalinist trends as a kind of enemy, as a kind of a machine, a war machine that produces constantly anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Okay, let's leave the Yuri Ivanov book and skip it and go to the anti-racism convention in South Africa in 2001. Do you remember?
Right. Yeah, the Durban
the Durban Convention. Some would say that this perpetuated, although in a new language, but this was a blueprint for the annihilation of Israel. In order to annihilate a person or a state or a group, you have to isolate it, you have to to boycott it, to slander it completely, to create an atmosphere of character assassination. And in the end, there would be, this is how the Nazis went into the Holocaust. They isolated completely the Jewish people in Europe. And so I think this is the intention of all those people who want Israel to be annihilated, is to isolate it, to delegitimize it, to boycott it, to fight it by legal means, which is very effective, by the way. And this is how the Palestinians and the Israeli left and the international left want to use the legal system, the supposedly international legal system. You know, in the midst of the Ukraine war, there is a very important article by a guy who is not very friendly to Israel, and this is Christoph Heusgen, who was the ambassador of Germany to the UN. And before he was ambassador, he was the close advisor to Chancellor Merkel. Christoph Heusgen. A great part of his article in Foreign Affairs is dedicated to the illegal or the decisions by President Trump to bring the US embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize the Golan Heights as a Israeli sovereignty. He said it completely violates the international law, as though if the international law will decide that Israel should be annihilated, it should be carried out.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, he's wrong, and he actually has a long. I think my colleague.
He's wrong, but he got center stage in foreign
affairs. Right. I mean, this is the problem, that you have mainstreaming of these lies about the nature of international law and what Israel's legal rights are. And I would commend to everybody my book, The Israeli Solution, just because there's a very long and in-depth discussion about the use of lawfare, the use of the law, the language of law, to try to criminalize Israel. But here I did find the story about the 1965 resolution. So I wrote here, 2 years before the Six-Day War, the Soviet delegation to the United Nations began calling Zionism a form of racism, calling into question Israel's very right to exist. Dr. Meir Rosen, who served as Israel's consul to New York during the proceedings, said, That forgotten episode, ironically, had a serious impact on the subsequent evolution of world opinion on international law regarding Israel and Zionism. He explained that the Soviet maneuver paved the way for the November 10th, 1975 passage of UN General Assembly Resolution 3379, which equated Zionism with racism. So what people don't realize is the long pedigree of the canard about the Jewish national liberation movement being a form of racism, and therefore the Jewish national project, Jewish self-determination itself being a criminal enterprise, Jewish history being a criminal conspiracy.
The Soviets understood that racism is the main point. They didn't mention it in 1948 and not even in the early 50s, but later on they understood that there are two pariah states. It's Nazi Germany and the apartheid state of South Africa, and Israel should be lumped with.
And also the United States. Don't forget that the Soviets also used racism in the United States instrumentally to try to deny the morality of the United States and its fight against the Soviet Union in the Cold War to great effect, because what we're seeing today in the cancellation culture or the cancel culture in the United States and the radical left instrumental use of racism, false allegations of racism is the same thing.
This is a Stalinist heritage, and they understood, the enemies of Israel worldwide, that if you want to hurt Israel, to destroy it, you have to paint it with racist colors.
And incidentally, I think that what you were saying, or not incidentally at all, I think your point about the Soviets being one of the three, or Stalin being one of the three founding fathers of the UN, is so terribly important for understanding how the UN became the most powerful organ for the dissemination of anti-Semitism worldwide.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that this is a key point that you're citing here from this New Yorker article, because if I would.
No, the New Yorker didn't mention it, but they quoted Kislitsia, who is the Ukraine ambassador, as saying that the Stalinist DNA is embedded in the UN.
And the reason why I think that this is critical also, I'm reading I've been reading it for a long time. I sort of put it aside because it became annoying to me. But I'm reading the biography of Arthur Vandenberg, who was one of perhaps the most important U.S. senator in putting together the post-war architecture of the Cold War with President Truman, and he was in the UN. He was in the U.S. delegation to the UN in San Francisco after the war. And the part that I sort of got irritated with and didn't feel like reading anymore was where he was making all of these deals with the Soviets and how he was watering down the purpose of the UN in order to get Soviet buy-in to it. So you're absolutely right. I mean, the Soviets played a pivotal role in watering down and the role of the UN, or the purpose of the UN, to enable them to use the organization to greater effect in the United States in the intervening years for the purpose of undermining the morality of democratic states in their war, their political warfare against the US and its allies. So I think you're absolutely right. It was there from the outset, and people always forget about it, and that's a key point. And it brings us back to, where I really do want to just spend the rest of our discussion talking about the elites, because there's so many events that are occurring today in Israel and of course in the United States that could never happen if you didn't have a ruling class in both countries that is overpopulated by people. The dominant force inside of them both are post-nationalist in the most sympathetic rendition of what moves them, that they're globalists, that they don't feel an attachment to or an allegiance towards first and foremost their own people, but rather to a transnational class of people. And this loss of the sort of connection between the two of the nation and the elites of that nation are I think critically endangering both countries. And Amnon, I just want to mention to our viewers who probably are less familiar with your work because it's mainly in Hebrew. This, by the way, I think maybe the first conversation I've ever had with you that's in English, and it's good.
We didn't talk in English ever.
I don't know. I think maybe I reel off into English every once in a while.
I'm not so fluent.
No, you do great. I may have to continue talking to you in English. I'm enjoying this, but Amnon is one of the foremost, I would say, commentators on the Israeli left. I mean, you grew up in the cradle of the Israeli left in the kibbutz movement as a kibbutznik, and you also made a journey from left to right. But you also, you wrote a biography of Uri Avineri, who is one of the most important people in the radicalization of the Israeli left, and you've written a number of books that speak to the DNA, basically, of the Israeli left. And so I'd really like to talk to you a little bit about what's happened on the left that, people like Yair Lapid, Omer Bar-Lev, Merav Michaeli, all of these people who populate the Israeli left, Benny Gantz, the military brass that's part of the left and the ruling class in Israel have just gradually, and some not so gradually, moved away from Zionism in a very dangerous way.
Well, it's a great subject. I mean, a huge subject.
If you could try to just distill it a little bit.
I think, first of all, you mentioned the term ruling class. It's better than using the term elites or whatever. And I think there was a sociologist by the name Professor Chava Etzioni Halevi from Bar-Ilan. She wrote on the Israeli elites already in the 1990s, which is quite early for this concept. And she mentioned in her concept that it sounds paradoxical that the Israeli elite is particularly elitist, which means that they are more detached from the people, that they feel great superiority over the common people in Israel, because in most places, everywhere there are elites. I mean, states need elites to lead us in various areas, but those elites feel a bit guilty, a bit of shame, and they try to make up for their supposedly privileged condition. Not so in Israel. In Israel, the elites feel that their privilege and superiority is justifiable, that they are entitled to it. Why? Because they built the country. They spilled blood. They're still very close. The elites of today are still very close to the years of building the Israeli state. They spilled blood here. They defended the country. I know all those people personally. I mean, they fought in the Yom Kippur War, in the 6 Days War, in this war and that war and the other war. Many wars. They killed many Arabs. They created initially a small community of 650,000 people, which was already a Hebrew community, an Israeli community, a Jewish community in the land of Israel by the year 1948. Suddenly, this community had to absorb 3 times over. In a way, in order to build the state, not just the pre-state community, they sort of committed suicide. They gave up all the all the assets, the cultural assets, maybe the economical assets that they built in order to absorb the refugees, the Nitzolim, the survivors from the Holocaust, and the Plitim, all the refugees from the Arab countries, maybe 1.5 million total. It's a lot. There's a lot of sacrifice, and it's created some kind of a barrier that they are superior, that they are in charge of everything, and you are there like a mob, and we have to lead you. You don't know what's good for you. There is the saying of David Ben Gurion, the people don't know what they want. We know what the people need, something like this. And this is, in general, it's a motto of the Israeli elite. We know what the people need. The people who vote don't know what they need. They vote for Bibi Netanyahu, and of course, there is historical divides within the old Jewish community of Israel between left and right. The right, the revisionists led by Jabotinsky, it's an old story. They were described by David Ben Gurion himself, and not just in the 1930s, but during World War II, when the ashes of a Beitar member and the ashes of a Shomer Tzair member were mixed together in the crematorium, Ben Gurion called Etzel and the revisionists Nazis, not fascists. You have to understand it. People don't understand it, don't realize it. I discovered it in the biography of Ben Gurion written by Shabtai Tevet. So this is how they saw the right wing in Israel, a complete boycott, although the right wing in Israel is the cradle of liberalism in the Israeli society. It's complete absurd. Begin, and later on, Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu is the true heir of the revisionism of Menachem Begin. But unlike Menachem Begin, Bibi is a very strong character, and he would never step to and say, I can't continue. The way Begin said, Eineni yachol od.
Right, I can't go on.
And he proved that his leadership is good for Israel. It strengthens Israel. But in order to get rid of him, they would twist any rule and any law and any norm of a democratic society. And this way, you can see a prime minister who has no public support and deteriorating situation. Now,
I think that
but you have to understand another thing. Mm-hmm. And one of the most important institutions in Israel, of course, is the Hebrew University. From the outset, I take it from my friend, Dr. Uri Cohen, who's a great researcher of the Israeli Academy and especially the Hebrew University. From the outset, those people like Magnus and others who established the Hebrew University thought of Judaism or Jewish nationalism as a particularly dark kind of nationalism. Not like Arab nationalism, not like Italian nationalism or French nationalism, or God forbid, German nationalism. Jewish nationalism, particularly in the eyes of those who established the Hebrew University, was that this kind of is particularly dark kind of nationalism, and we should be aware of it and should shy away from it completely. It's Martin Buber, it's Gershom Scholem, although Gershom Scholem was definitely a Jewish nationalist, and his letters to Hannah Arendt are famous. He blamed her. I saw what you wrote about the Eichmann trial. There's no, ein ahavat, I didn't find there ahavat Israel, love of Israel.
So here's the thing, we have to cut it short a little bit, but I agree with you. I mean, I think that the Israeli elite has been unique in many ways because on the one hand, it really does have, and I can attest as, you know, I moved to Israel, I made Aliyah 31 years ago. And I to this day, I can't believe the vitriol that's spewed at me by these old school Israelis.
I would like also to quote Moshe Shamir. Do you remember the name?
Wait, let me just finish this. That they think that I have no right to speak because I'm not one of them. I mean, it's this absolute
one
negation.
of us.
Yeah, you are not one of us. You are not allowed to speak, and that's what's so stunning to me.
Yiddish, nicht von unserer, lo mishelanu.
Yeah, you're not one of us. You may not speak. You know, Uri Segiu was the head of Israeli military intelligence, referred to anybody who wasn't a member of the old boys club in Israel, and he referred to himself without any embarrassment as, you know, a member of the Mayflower generation of Israel. We're the wasps of Israel, he said to us. Everybody else was a deviation from the norm and they weren't allowed to speak. So there's definitely a lot of that. And also, you know, I spoke 2 weeks ago with Professor Uman, and he talked about Magnus and the fact that Ben-Gurion didn't think that it was worth going after the anti-Zionists and Brit Shalom and everything. And here, you know, I think that you also see that the Hebrew University was established by anti-Zionists who did not want Jewish statehood. They wanted universalism. They were, you know, products of either in Magnus's case, he was the rabbi of a Reform synagogue in New York that wanted
let me mention, you know,
usually
American Jews don't want to hear bad stories about Israel. You know, in 1972, 73, there was a guy like me, son of a kibbutz, Udi Adiv, who was caught, who was arrested as a member of a terrorist cell of the Popular Front and collaborating with Syrian intelligence. This was a great shock. I mean, a Sabra who grew on a kibbutz in a Zionist family and served in the paratroopers, become a mechabel, a terrorist, or potential. Moshe Shamir said about it. Moshe Shamir was one of the great authors, writers in Israel in the past. He died already. He said, why are you so surprised? In the Israeli left, in the Zionist left, we educate our youth that we have a great family of progressive and great friends, Che Guevara, we Mao Zedong, Stalin at his time, Ho Chi Minh, all of them are great revolutionaries, and we bow for them. So why are you surprised that one of this family, George Frabash, claims that Israel should be annihilated? And why are you surprised that one of the people that we educated in the left thinks that Chabash is also an integral, or Yasser Arafat is part of this family of great personalities of humanity, and he wants to join the party.
In other words, you get what you get out what you put in. If this is what you're teaching,
if you don't teach a person to live in a cognitive dissonance, and Udi Adiv, who is now a lecturer in the Open University, he didn't want to live in a personal contradiction. He joined the fight, the progressive fight, to annihilate the Jews.
And by the way, you know, the Israeli left continues to have very warm ties with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I mean, I think, you know, that's worth pointing out as well. There's something about that. They get money from the European Union. They get cooperation from Israeli radical leftist NGOs. So I think.
But some of those people are not like this. One of for instance, a person I know, he already died. I mean, he wasn't a friend of mine, but I know him. He was the editor of Al Mishmar, one of the main
communist newspapers
papers
in Israel.
of the left, socialists, Chaim Shur. At the beginning of the Second Intifada, he exploded against the Palestinian leaders. He said, I personally opened the United States and the Jewish community in the States to those leaders. We convinced the United States to give them visas. And suddenly they attack us. So Chaim Shur and others like him took a reverse step. They understood that they were betrayed. Essentially, they wanted, in a very naive way, peace with the Arabs, with the Palestinians. But when they faced reality, when they were mugged by reality, by terrorism, they understood the condition and they didn't join the blood.
I think that this is a good place to kind of conclude our discussion, because I think here, you see this cognitive dissonance, you see this awakening that after you've been mugged by reality, and then you can take somebody like Shlomo Ben Ami, who was the foreign minister and the minister of police ahead of them at the time of the Muhammad Al-Dura blood libel. And he was, very far left guy all the years as a professor at Tel Aviv University. And he came out, he was interviewed by Ari Shavit in Haaretz, and he acknowledged that, he was a member of the Israeli delegation to Camp David. And he said, fundamentally, the Palestinian national narrative is based on a negation of the Jewish narrative and nothing else. They don't have anything positive that doesn't have to do with annihilating us. There's no aspect of the Palestinian national movement that isn't about annihilating Jews. In other words,
Caroline, I had a lot of conversations with Palestinians, even in back channel conversations. The two main things that they want is zchut hashiva, the right of return, and the right for armed struggle. Statehood is very low in their priorities.
Right. So, but let me just tap this off, because we're talking about blood libels at the beginning, and he was in a leadership role when the Muhammad Al-Dura blood libel was pushed forward. When the blood libel, by the way, of Rob Malley and Hussein Aga was published in the New York Times, we're saying that.
No, I wouldn't say that Hussein Aga.
Let me just finish the sentence. That they said that, Israel didn't offer anything serious to the Palestinians in Camp David, and essentially legitimized what was happening on the ground. And I know you're friends with Hussein Aga, but that article in the New York Times was a complete falsehood, and it was a complete rewriting of what had just happened.
Wasn't it in the New York Review of Books?
I thought it was the New York Times. Maybe it was the New York Review of Books. I mean, but the point is that you had real-time rewriting of history as it was blowing up. I mean, it was like 3 months later, they were writing this total lie about what had just happened. People were there in real time, and they were lying about it to try to justify the Palestinian terror war that was breaking out at those moments. And so Shlomo Ben Ami comes out with this statement. And then I quoted him in my book, and he was at a conference, a Haaretz conference many years later, and a woman on a panel with him read from my book the word for word what he had said to Ari Shavit. But 10 years later, he had completely forgotten what he had learned in 2000. He started screaming at her because she was bringing up that momentary restoration of reason. And then he didn't want that anymore. He wanted to go back to not believing it, to being able to participate in legitimizing a blood libel or the blood libelers, the PLO. And here you see, I think, both the power of the blood libel that never goes away, as Hadassah Ben Ito said, and also the betrayal of the elites, that they would rather continue on the path of legitimizing the slanderers, the libelers, and be part of that, that in crowd of post-nationalists than deal with the reality that they saw.
One thing I want to say, I mean, whatever Shlomo Ben Ami says, he's not a supporter of blood libels. I mean,
fine, he's not a supporter. He doesn't have to be a supporter of blood libels, although look,
maybe he's not a great.
Nachman Shai wrote a dissertation, you said, on Muhammad Al-Dura, and yet here he is. You know?
Yes. So you can even say that he's not a great supporter of Israel, but he's not a supporter also of a blood libel.
But I would argue, my contention here is that the PLO, if you legitimize the PLO, and the PLO uses blood libels as the basis of their operation, and has for over 50 years, then you are enabling it, you are facilitating it. And we see this with Nachman Shai in real time, that he's doing it today. So he doesn't have to say, of course, I believe that we're poisoning the wells. But Mahmoud Abbas said it in front of the European Union, the European Parliament, and got a standing ovation.
I think his wife, when she was escorting Hillary Clinton when she toured the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, mentioned that that the Israelis are poisoning or doing injecting AIDS to Palestinians.
No, we were poisoning their water.
Something like this.
No, so the point is that when you legitimize people who propagate blood libels as a way of life, you may not believe that Jews are actually poisoning the wells, but what you're doing is you're enabling other people to say that we are, and receive standing ovations in the halls of power in Europe.
I think what surprises me is that we are, in the last 2.5 years, or almost 2.5 years, there was some pretty good cooperation and collaboration between Israel and the Palestinian Authority in fighting the coronavirus. And you would think that this kind of cooperation would lead to good places. No, it led to violence. We see it now.
So I think on that happy note, we can talk about, what does it mean when you feed the hand that bites you, and maybe we should think about not doing that anymore. Anyway, all right. I thank you very much, Amnon, for joining me today, and I'll have you back again. Well, I think we should actually devote an entire hour just to the second half of our discussion, which is the Israeli left, because I think and maybe we can talk a little bit about the Israeli left and the American Jewish community, because I think that those ties are also incredibly important to highlight. But in the meantime, I hope that you guys got a sense of both the danger of blood libels and also the danger of legitimizing the libelers and how it's done in Israel. So
thank you for hosting me.
Oh, well, now we're gonna have to talk next time we meet, we're gonna have the entire discussion in English because I'm enjoying this.
Okay.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much for watching us. And remember, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to the Middle East News Hour, and on the podcasts, and on JNS, and on the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour YouTube and Rumble channels. And we will see you again very soon. Take care.